This panel is all about artificial intelligence and machine learning. I don't need to introduce myself because I've been probably talking too much this week. So I'd like to invite my panelists over. Let me just make sure I pronounce all the names correctly. We have Mr. Joshua Bower-Saul. Did I get it? Yeah, good. Good. From Cybertonica. Miss Martina King from Featurespace. She's the CEO. And then Mr. Peter Smith, Head of Strategic Development at TISA, if I can use the word. So we're looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning, but none of that matters until we know who you are.
I'm Joshua Bower-Saul, and I'm the CEO of a startup called Cybertonica. We use machine learning and AI to do payment security and other types of risk-based services. So we're a hub using artificial intelligence to build the risk hub of the future. We're quite close to our neighbor here in many ways. But we have maybe a separate take on how and what data to work with. So that's going to be an interesting discussion.
Hello, I'm Martina King. I'm the CEO of Featurespace. We're the world leader in adaptive behavioral analytics. What we do is we build statistical profiles for every single consumer in a data set. We update that on every event that goes through in the data. We're then able to run anomaly detection to see what's different, because most things in data is pretty standard. It's the unusual that you're looking for. And then we're able to turn that into, well, the greatest success we've had so far in applying this new methodology has been in, first of all, the identification of new types of fraud attacks. Actually, fraud is really interesting because there's a great data set, but we'll probably come and talk about that in a sec. But also the dramatic reduction in false alerts that go through. So you know when you get your bank card stopped, we can stop that problem because we know who you are. It's a very different take on it. And also the other side of machine learning, which is the effect that it can have on jobs. So we can take an awful lot of the mundane away from the jobs that are being done that machines can do.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I'm the imposter in the room. I'm Peter Smith from TISA. I know very little about AI and machine learning, but TISA is the financial services industry body, which is fairly unique. It's not a trade body, it's an industry body which has 175 member firms, which are most of the big banks, most of the fund groups, most of the wrap and platforms, solicitors, accountants, Microsoft, and all sorts of people as members. We're a non-for-profit organisation, been running for 25 years. And we are the glue in the industry between the regulator, the Treasury, the FCA, and up until recently, the European regulators. We're getting heavily involved in FinTech, heavily involved in the development of a UK digital identity for financial services, and about 18 other projects are running currently.
Great. So let's start with something specific for Peter, and then we'll get to that. So,
thanks.
So what do you got? What regulation is around the corner for artificial intelligence and machine learning? Because obviously, the more going back to the point that Martina made, that as artificial intelligence starts to create more jobs, there's also the potential of effects on the economy. So how do you open up the new, let's say, machine learning, artificial intelligence, while preserving the economics and GDP of a nation? Is anything being looked into?
Not right now, because we're totally focused on Brexit and formulating a project with the Treasury and with the government to pull together a Brexit response for UK financial services and for FinTech. But the thing to say, I think you had Chris Woolard in here at some time this week. As far as all the current regulation is that's sitting in front of us, that still stands. Nothing changes. Brexit doesn't change anything. And even when we get Article 50 in the new year to take us out of Brexit, all the current stuff that's been in front of us, from Payment Services Director, the data regs, MiFID, PRIPS, all that sort of stuff stays and will be implemented. MiFID and PRIPS both come in before we will ever get out of Europe. So in terms of how it affects machine learning, you're faced with the same concerns that we'll probably get into in a minute as that the regulator has with machines, and how you guys are programming them right, and how you're protecting the consumer, and how consumers are not all being shoehorned or earmarked into one solution at the end of the process, and that there's due diligence and risk oversight, that certain consumers who may click into the business at the front don't actually end up with a solution at the end because it's not suitable for them.
Cool. So I'm going to go a little bit into the future. So we're not necessarily into self-aware artificial intelligence. That would be scary. So I'd say that's on one side of the spectrum, and on the other side you have, sort of task-oriented, machine learning, solving complex problems, making it easier for us to do work. Where is the ceiling? Where are we now as far as the industry goes? What's the next frontier? Where do you draw the line?
Well, I like to think, if I may, I like to think that we're pretty close to understanding that in Cybertonica, because we have a team that's multinational. We use Russian technicians, UK technicians, EU, Turkey. We've been in many markets looking at the markets that we are serving. And what we're finding is that that continuum that started with people doing things in an Excel spreadsheet about 15 years ago, and then moving to databases, then moving to what they called big data, then actually moving to big data, then actually moving to machine learning on the big data, and then going to artificial intelligence, which is the connection of more than one multivariable, we would call it anomaly as well, into the mix of the algorithmic learning. That we're already there. So I think what's next is a real return to the neural networks of the 80s of Yudkowsky and Chomsky and people who saw the brain as a machine. That is going to happen in the next 15 years, that's for sure. And I think what's interesting about everybody needs a MiFID person and a passport from the UK to work across Europe, but our business is already fundamentally global. So when we and you look at a fraud pattern or a series of exceptions that we have to manage as potential fraud, we're looking at devices, accounts, transactions that go from Hong Kong to Vladivostok to Buenos Aires. And that's done in 600 milliseconds. So it's there, in the sense of its application, but its potential is still huge, right?
And Martine?
Probably two things I'd just like to mention. The first one is, so we were asked to do a project which was around whether it's possible to predict if a skin lesion, can you identify the moment of the change that occurs in that? So can you start to predict skin cancer before it turns cancerous? What was really interesting about that project is that while you have the data set to be able to analyse that and the maths to be able to do it, that's all there. What actually doesn't quite yet exist is the reliance on the data that you're then working on. So, for instance, if you're trying to use an app to be able to monitor a skin lesion, what you need to be able to do is have your prior, so your image, to compare your next image in exactly an identical format. So you need the same light, the same distance, the same angle. And if that is changed in any way, then your data isn't pure. So what we see with this sort of technology is that the technology is there to be able to do it, but the consequence of that is that you have too many what are referred to as false positives, too many incorrect answers. And when you're predicting something as important as cancer, you really need your accuracy to be high. What's fascinating about the financial services world is that actually your data is in great shape. And that's why you'll find an awful lot of technology companies at the moment really interested in the financial services area. It's well organised, it's labelled well on the whole, and so the job of cleaning data in financial services actually is a very light job. So it makes your kind of data set very attractive to companies like us. And then the second point I'd like to make really is then what I'm interested in, once I get my head around how the technology works, can you then explain it to people? Can you get hold of the data and work out what happens with it? And then the final side of that is, well, is there a business uplift? Because there's a lot of hype around this stuff. And what I'm really interested in is to know, is there a financial impact? Now, it may be no surprise, but what we've done today, because this event is so good and so important, is that we've launched a piece of research that we've done with a company called Ocall. And what we've done is we've been working with several banks and card issuers, looking at their data set and comparing old systems against new methodology. And what we found is not only can we identify, particularly in the risk area, more fraud attacks, but then we can reduce the number of fraud attacks that are taking place. Interesting. Does anybody work in the fraud area here? Yeah, okay, so not very many people. In the financial services area, there are thousands of people that are employed inside banks in particular who are dealing with the alerts that are coming off these systems that are not very accurate. So what we've been able to calculate is that by reducing the number of fraud attacks, by reducing the number of false alerts that go through to call centres, and so therefore the cost of those call centres, and also by just allowing more business through, because obviously those transactions aren't any longer booked, just in the card issuing industries alone, we've calculated that we can save 12 billion a year.
What scale was that, just out of curiosity? 12 billion in the...
$12 billion
in which
year
market?
In the card issuing and banks area. So for people who are issuing cards and payments area, just that one little section alone, where we spent a lot of time really trying to work with existing systems to compare what the new technologies can do, the financial impact is unbelievable. So we've announced that today because we thought that would be something that would be really interesting for this audience.
Cool. Now, general question. I think maybe we'll start with Peter again. So obviously we're talking about machine learning in cybersecurity sense. To put a simple question, which is probably more complex than it sounds, what is it that you're protecting against? What are the common things that you don't want to happen that you need to regulate against?
Oh, well, the main thing is the security of the data. There is a huge focus on security of consumers' data, and if you look at what's coming in the Payment Services Directive and the data regs, there's going to be some changes to business models that people are going to have to enact, particularly those established models with lots of legacy business to cope with the protection of consumers' data and information. If I'm just to jump back to your previous question, I'm looking into the future about what's likely to happen, there is a stream of thought now about is the regulation around the coding rather than the distributor. Because if you look at what's happening with FINRA in the States, with IOSMA in Europe, and with the FCA here and their concerns around automated advice or artificial intelligence, it sits around 4 key areas. One is design, one is coding and have you coded it right, the other is the outputs, and the final one is the investor protection and risk. And FINRA in the States, where you've got robo-advice been running for some while now, were quite concerned when they looked at 7 different models, given the same 27-year-old individual male who was investing for retirement, and got variations in the equity investment between 90% and 50% for that same one customer. And for fixed interest, it was between 10% and 40%. So the regulator's real concern is around the algorithms and how you're coding, and although they will allow some tolerance, not that much tolerance. And the other real thing is just protecting the consumer outcomes. The difficulty in the UK is, as we currently stand, and there won't be any trenching back or deregulation. The regulations we've got at the moment are coming in, we may get even more, and when we come out of Europe, are all around protecting the consumer, but there is no tick list of things you have to do. It's all based on consumer outcomes. So one of the things that we are working with the Treasury and the regulator and the PRA on is around how we can define consumer risk, how we can simplify products, and with certain products earmark them or kite mark them, or get some open industry agreement to the standards that apply to those products, so that they then can be distributed automatically via machines or via robotic advice.
I'd just like to react to that, because it's a very interesting point. I mean, first of all, I think in both the companies that are here, all of our data is within compliance because we don't actually see any personal data. And where the problem arises is when you have systems that are sort of gray area between permission-based systems and let's call it tokenized or cryptographic systems like the ones we use. You occasionally have to look at data sets that you don't know the origin of. And one of the problems that's going to arise very quickly in the regulatory space, Brexit or no Brexit, just because of artificial intelligence and its capabilities of exponential improvement in refining understandings, is that you're going to be in a situation where consumers may make a choice to be within a system. Like what we manufacture basically is what we call safe payers. They want to be in that system. They want to have the advantages of that system, which may even include credit ratings or other advantages. And the regulation is going to be behind the technical ball. And one of the things that worries me, like when we go to our PSD2 conferences and so on, is Cybertonica, and I'm sure Featurespace as well, we have PSD2 done. It's done. We don't need a regulator to tell us that we need those fields. We've got that done, and we know the chargeback address, and we know whether the person is real or not. And in fact, Cybertonica, as I'm sure many of our competitors, we already are looking at social reputation and things that are being used in government now. So I'm just worried about this conflict between the pace of the technology and the pace of the regulator's thought process. Maybe some artificial intelligence would help.
I don't think that's any different for any technology we've ever seen launched. I mean, I was on the internet in 1999, and the kind of social impact that has had, and in fact, so many of those companies coming out of California, it was a real surprise to many people, young people in California, that they had to adhere to rules that existed in other countries around the world, because obviously the web didn't apply, the normal laws of the land didn't apply. We don't need to go and learn those lessons over again, those people working in new technology. I think all we need to do is make sure that A, we're aware of the laws of the land, and that B, we use our common sense and we do the right thing, because, and we all know about the FCA, we all know about treating customers fairly. And the other thing is that if you put your company at risk by not actually doing the right things on behalf of your customers, well, we've seen an awful lot, for instance, in the payday market, the payday loan market, the regulation changed, and those companies, many of them went out of business, or they're a shadow of what they were. We just don't need to learn those lessons again. I think if you're going to work with new technology companies, you just need to make sure that they are putting the right processes and practices in place, because obviously you in financial services have been having to do that for many long days.
Cool. I'm going to ask one more question, and again, it's probably going to be very future-facing, because that stuff really fascinates me. But do you think in the next 10 years we're somewhere near where quantum computing will affect the industry, or is it still way too early to tell? Is that more of a 50-year thing? Because obviously with machine learning, there's a limit to where we can go. But as soon as that happens, it's a game changer. It's like the internet in the 90s. Within 5 years this time, the whole world will be different, encryption will be different, and all your businesses will be different. Is that a 10-year thing, or is it something you think will take a lot longer?
Well, the guy who launched our company, Professor Bill Fitzgerald, the key thing is, do the computers take over, or do humans still have a role? And what he said is he could not imagine a day for a very long time where the computers would be just running everything. So so today, for instance, with machine learning, you still need a human to be able to set the system up. When the alert comes out, you still need a human to be able to determine whether that is a correct alert, so that then it can teach the system. The system, is incredibly smart, but you still need verification from a human being's interaction with the consumer to be able to then teach the system back again. And that is the case in all machine learning, and is likely to be the case for some time to come. And even when computers, and kind of way off into the future, computers probably will be able to run an awful lot of stuff on their own, we still have the capability of building the red button in and pulling the plug out.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I would say there are two scenarios for artificial intelligence. One I think is called the Zoom scenario, which is based on the fact that at one point there will be a breakthrough due to resource availability. And then we're talking not just about the very clean data that we're working with in financial services and the way we protect that data, but we're talking about data that is life and death decision making. So you're talking about managing automated driving, you're talking about surgery done by with the support of artificial intelligence, or cancer diagnosis. By the way, I happen to work on that same company, but not in the artificial intelligence space. If you go back a generation before this, the whole medical device industry will change because of this. Already you can use libraries of heartbeats using artificial intelligence-enabled stethoscopes to get a much higher diagnosis level of cardiac problems than you could using a doctor's knowledge even after 20 years of experience in cardio. So there are a lot of things that are going to be changing, but I think the leap you're talking about depends on that scenario. Either it's the Zoom scenario or what they call the soft AI scenario, which is incremental AI. In our business, as you indicated, we use both supervised and unsupervised algorithms, they're called. So the unsupervised ones teach themselves after a certain point, and what we do is teach them what exceptions are, or what seasonality is for a merchant, for example. They won't naturally take that knowledge in. That's human understanding of particularly those types of soft issues. In a kind of aside, I just mentioned I started my early career as a simultaneous interpreter of Russian and French, and then I went into media, digital media. And the whole understanding of what a sign is in language and the algorithmic thinking necessary to go through different languages makes it physically and mentally impossible to interpret three ways at once, right? And yet there are people who can do it. And in the same way, artificial intelligence, when it gets to the neural network stage, will reach a quantitative different capability of analysis and output. So there's no way of telling whether it's, for me, a soft or a zoom. But if it is a zoom, it will go very, very fast. I mean, in the internet, you were mentioning the internet, 97, I think there's a famous article printed in a paper, a London paper, that said the internet was a fad and it would go away. So you never know.
Yeah, I haven't got a clue what AI will look like in 5 years, let alone 10 years' time, but I think I can probably reassure you that regulation won't be any different and won't be any lesser than it is at the moment. And we will look to re-engage, certainly with Europe. I've spent 2 years working on the EU single digital market strategy, only to find that we jump out of Europe. But we will be looking to reconnect somehow to pick up with that regulation, otherwise we won't be able to trade. What I can share with you is obviously the Treasury, the FCA and the MPs that sit on my board, and I have to go into the House of Commons to talk to, although I'm still working out which ones I've now got to talk to, because I'm finding out this week, even by Twitter, that people are moving around the various seats in the House. But what they are really conscious of is that the UK is the #1 financial services centre, and the UK is also the #1 fintech centre. We also have a digital agenda set by the Conservatives when they were re-elected to power. That digital agenda stays, and the government will be working with the regulation and with the development, because we do accept, and we were discussing this morning, the disconnect between the pace of innovation and the pace of regulation, and how we've got to smarten that up. It won't mean easier regulation, but it will mean smarter regulation around what we look at. And certainly my job is to get ministers and government officials and the regulators to fully understand what's happening in fintech and the tech community, so that we can drive that forward. Our Brexit response will cover about 6 themes, I think we agreed yesterday at a board meeting, one of which will definitely be fintech. One of the others is likely to look at taxation. So the response from the UK would likely be, let's look at taxation and corporation tax to stop everybody decamping to Berlin or Paris or wherever they're going to be tempted to go and develop.
It's very interesting you mentioned that particular one, because right now there's another piece of the UK government that's looking at traffic and social to define activity in the UK in a different way than it has been defined before. And artificial intelligence also applies. I mean, there's a lot of reg tech in artificial intelligence that's been ignored up to now that will make applying regulation a lot easier.
Yeah, and reg tech is likely to be at the forefront of any response that we do, because we see that as key to building the fintech industry.
Road tech's quite interesting, isn't it? Especially after what we've seen happen in America last week. But if you think about just the UK, I think it's something like 14,000 deaths a year on the roads in the UK. Now, one of the things about machine learning is that, whether we like it or not, machines are more accurate than humans. They make fewer mistakes than we do. And if anything, put simply, that's really what the race is about. It's about finding the areas in life where humans still make more mistakes and getting the machines to do them because they are more reliable. So although it's shock horror that somebody's been killed, unfortunately, as a result of driving an Elon Musk car, it's probably far more likely. I mean, apparently he didn't have the automated feature turned on. It's turned out. But anyway, point of the story is, that's what the race is. We're trying to find all the areas of life where we're relying on humans, where humans are less reliable. And that's, in the terminology, is the reduction of false positives. So although it might be a shock that a computer will make a mistake, that'll be the headline. What won't be the headline is that obviously it's far, far fewer mistakes than us as humans will make.
Great, and I think we'll need to leave it there in order to keep track of stay on schedule. But thank you to our panelists on artificial intelligence and machine learning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.